Listen, man, let me talk to some of y'all really quickly because I see some things going around, man. And it's important that the creators, man, and I tried to tell my brothers this. It was just a lot of information that they missed. No accountant made a $400,000 mistake, man. Wow. That's some of the stuff that we've been going through behind the scenes. Man, wow. My brothers are in pain. I would be in pain too if I felt like my man stole $400,000. No accountant made a $400,000 mistake. $400,000, man. That's just how Spotify paid us out in the second year, where it was a $400,000 payout that was paid out, prorated through the whole 2-year process. If these brothers just took 2 seconds to stop thinking Joe was a bad guy and just looked at the 5 years of accounting that was sent over, man, it tells a really beautiful story. You don't have to call your brother a thief. You don't have to say that your brother's a liar. You don't have to accuse your brother of things. You don't have to insult the music career. That doesn't have to happen, man. You could just look at the accounting. Such a simple thing.
Yeah, Joe, I'm sorry, bruh. Love the podcast. Love what you've created. You're great at content, but you need to go in the cover and give yourself a nasty award for the last week or so you've had. It's been nasty. Shout out Joe Budden and his podcast. It's going through a little bit of a transition period right now. So Rory and Mal opted to do their own little interview here, former co-host of the Joe Budden podcast, after they were fired on the air on Joe's podcast about a week or so ago. So I could go into dramatic, great detail about what Rory and Mal said. Check out the episode. I think it's like $2. I would post a clip, but they got a paywall behind it, so I'm not going to get involved with that. Essentially what Rory and Mal wanted to make clear was that, we were not employees of the Joe Budden podcast. We profit shared. Joe has refuted that, by the way. But I also wanted to put out in the atmosphere that, Rory said, look, Joe denied me in the negotiations access to some of the YouTube money. Joe went off on me when I went to Tidal to discuss deals with Elliott Wilson. Like, Joe had been essentially kind of, every time we brought up money, every time we brought up accounting, Joe seemed to get super defensive. And that's where I believe a lot of the issues are coming from here with the Joe Budden podcast. Mal's direction was a little more straightforward, like, bruh, Joe Budden has changed. And if I'm reading him correctly, I believe Mal thinks the change happened when 2 big events happened with the podcast and Joe Budden, which is when they turned down the deal with Spotify and when Joe Budden opted to create the Joe Budden Network, inclusive to other podcasts, in which we'll get into more in a second here. So Mal, this was one of the quotables from that said interview, or that podcast, rather. I'll name this podcast later, featuring Rory and Mal. Mal said, I feel like Joe feels like a lot of the success of the podcast is based off his music career. And my thing is, it's not. I've been in some of the cities when you were a rapper, Joe. This many people weren't showing up for you. And I do tend to agree with Mal. Like, I wasn't a Joe Budden music fan. I wasn't. I only knew pump, 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 pump it up. That's all I knew. Other than that, I think I became a fan of the Joe Budden podcast when the Drake Meek situation popped off, and then how Joe kind of got brought into the fold of that. That's when I started watching. So right before Mal came around is when I became a fan of the Joe Budden podcast. Also, Rory and Mal brought up $400,000 of income that was missing somewhere down the line. I don't want to blame this person, that person. It ain't my situation, but apparently there was $400,000 missing. That was a big deal. And then it ended up with Rory and Mal at the end of the thing trying to get much more of the behind the scenes and the audited situation, whatever you want to call it. They wanted to know where the money was at. And I think Joe's position was Rory and Mal was supposed to get paid not off the gross income of the podcast, but off the net. Meaning, after everything's bought, after all the equipment is purchased and all that, this is what you make. And Joe's position has remained the same. Rory and Mal didn't know their contracts until the end, and it was already too late. I literally see how both sides can feel offended at the situation, right? Was Rory and Mal likely overpaid, considering that they were only working 2 times a week and just talking on a podcast? Like, how much easier can money get? Like, I'm stressing right now, editing 10, 20 videos a week, probably more than that. I'm stressing with what I got going on here. But even then, it's still a blessing to do what I get to do for a living. Like, you really about to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars because you can't get on the same page over nothing, right? Or not over nothing, but whatever it is, it seems like it could have been resolved with better communication and better understanding of deals. And I also see it from Rory and Mal's perspective in this regard. Joe, we built this together. This podcast wasn't cool without us. We've added to this platform. It started as just something we were doing. And somewhere along the lines, Joe has decided that he wants to be a CEO and wants to run multiple podcasts and be over that, run a network. Yo, bruh, these lines weren't packed like that for the Joe Budden music. This podcast, this relationship, the 3 of us, the 4 of us, when you include Parks, the communication, the relationship with the friendships we got is a big reason why you're in a position to launch other podcasts. You have to understand that, right? Again, you can go back and forth. Joe Budden and the Patreon deal seemed to be something that was another issue for Rory and Mal. And then also I look at it from this angle, to be fair to Joe, like, yo, Rory and Mal, y'all sat there on that podcast for years, laughing at other people's bad deals sometimes, discussing, when Joe brought up the Spotify deal, y'all sat there and shook y'all head and agreed with him. And I remember seeing y'all say, everybody can't do this. Everybody can't turn down the Spotify bag. When we're finding out now, listening to you guys communicate how bad things were behind the scenes, y'all weren't happy. You can't say everybody can't do this when you didn't even know what was y'all not able to do, because y'all didn't know the contracts and the situations, and y'all were unhappy. That sounds a little hypocritical. The point is, the podcast probably would have never been the same again, and that's how we end up in the place where we're at now, which it looks like Joe's considering all things, maybe even rotating some co-hosts in and out. We shall see. This has been the biggest story. This hip-hop soap opera is what I'm calling it, has even got to superstars of the likes of like a Kevin Hart, who on his own podcast gave his opinion on everything going on with Joe Budden. Keep in mind, Joe and Kevin Hart have had their differences after Joe talked about Kevin Hart's relationship and how he got caught cheating on his podcast a couple years ago. Kevin Hart said, I'm actually a supporter of the progression of him and his podcast from afar. I'm a fan of your growth, Joe. I'm a fan of what you're doing, and the conversation behind it is dope. But he's not doing business here. He wants to own it. He wants to control it. But to see you publicly shit on the guys that was with you, that's an example of poor leadership. That's an example of why you are where you are. This is why. Point blank, period. You want to be by yourself. You want to be king. You can't do that. You can't do that. Wealth should be shared, not owned. Facts. So this is a shout out to Rory and Mal. You guys were dope as fuck at that job. Once again, I was a fan of the fucking podcast. It's a sad day to see this shit end when you guys were on your way to what seems to be higher levels of success. And again, that is from the desk of Kevin Hart. And to be clear, I feel like Kev was probably waiting on a spot to take Joe down. Like when it's almost like when you're on the ground, just kick him a little bit. When it's an op of yours or an enemy of yours or somebody you don't get along with the most, or somebody that had something negative to say about you at one point in time when you were down. And I wouldn't be surprised one bit if Kevin Hart maybe even offer Rory and Mal some type of podcast deal with his Laugh Out Loud network. He's that type of petty, by the way. He is that type of petty. So we shall see. So Joe Budden's name is in the news for something even more serious than his podcast dispute with Rory and Mal, as allegations have come to the forefront from a former employee of Joe Budden's. So as Joe's created this podcast network, Olivia Dope was a part of a podcast under Joe called See the Thing Is, And she unfortunately left the podcast in the February-ish area because we're now finding out she claims Joe Budden sexually harassed her and made her uncomfortable while she was in the workplace.
My departure from See the Thing Is podcast, as well as the Joe Budden Network, I am here today to still uncomfortable, but find the bravery to finally speak on a very embarrassing situation. Not only to start my healing process, but to help give encouragement to others who have similar stories of sexual harassment in the workplace. On January 18th, 2021, Joe Budden sat in on a recording of the female-led podcast I was a part of and continuously made sexual suggestive remarks to me that made me extremely uncomfortable, as well as fearful of dampening the mood if I didn't laugh along while he made those sexual remarks to me. Those moments were not only, excuse me, those moments not only lived on the internet forever, it also forced me in the decision of quitting the podcast. And I'm now in a place where it was traumatizing, embarrassing, and I've decided that I have to actually speak up, because not only was it important for me to walk away from it, it also is important for me to speak up, not only to help heal myself, but also to probably help others in the future and let them know that this probably wouldn't be the best situation for you to enter into working with. There is now footage of her mother on the internet with somebody crossing a boundary with her mother. And that's on there forever. And I want to lead by example and let her know that.
Now, I can say this. I did go look at some of the timestamps that Olivia provided that, you know, would... Look, I'm a video editor. I've been editing videos for damn near a decade now. 100% every timestamp that Olivia said, there was some type of edit, you could tell, right? Some type of jump cut, in which you could clear as day. If you just casually edit videos, you know somebody's tampered with this video. Now, does that confirm what Joe Budden said? Was she saying Joe Budden said? No, it does not. Let's be fair. It does not. But if you're a podcast listener, you could probably, it doesn't shock me with some of the stuff that she claimed Joe Budden said. It wouldn't shock me one bit if he said it. Here's what I'm not going to do. Here's what I can't do. I come to Joe Budden's podcast sometimes for some fuckery, right? I just got to be real about it. So for me to now step on this platform, look, if we're talking about Rory and Mal, I thought Joe Budden handled that poorly. I thought he was incredibly fragile mentally in that entire ordeal. And at the end of the day, if I had to give the most blame, I'm saying Joe Budden was the most wrong. You claim you want to be a CEO, you're an executive. To me, you did not handle yourself as a CEO, as an executive. It's almost like he wants to be Charlemagne so bad, but he ain't moving the way Charlemagne does, publicly at least. Charlemagne would have never let it get to that point on air, on camera. He would have never tried to fire his homies on air. That's whack to me. But Joe comes from that love and hip hop lens. I don't come from that world. That's just my perspective on that. We called Joe Budden out on that. We were critical of him. In this, a much more serious situation, we're talking about sexual harassment. If Olivia's saying Joe made some kind of iffy jokes that made plays at her on a podcast that does talk about sex often, right? And women's empowerment, I get it. I ain't finna be the person to be critical of Joe, because I listen to the podcast not for sexual harassment, let's be clear, but for some of those teeter-the-line jokes. I'm a man, we like getting them jokes off. But when she said no, enough is enough, and when she said after the break, her and Joe talked, And essentially, she thought there was an understanding for her and Joe coming back to that podcast for him to stop with the inappropriate comments, and he went on to do it afterwards. Joe might have a problem again, man. I don't believe in cancel culture and all that, but the reality is, like, Joe's trying to negotiate his platform. He's trying to get big deals. It ain't gonna be great when Amazon types in Joe Budden's name in the word sexual harassment allegations pop up next to it. That ain't good for the brand, especially when it's a podcast under Joe Budden's network. That's not good. You don't want that. Now, Joe has since apologized to Olivia. In a statement that was released earlier on Tuesday, Budden said, "As a podcaster, it is my job to address topics and create dialogue around them. During the conversation on the See the Thing Is podcast, I didn't handle the topics with the sensitivity they deserved. I recognized my words and power in that situation and created an upsetting environment for Olivia. Upon reflection, both the network and I take accountability for this. I apologize sincerely to Olivia, her former co-host, our staff, and the public. In an effort to not further any trauma, the episode will be removed from all platforms. We support all women's right to feel comfortable and protected in the workplace. We fell short of that in this instance. We support Olivia in her quest to heal, applaud her for finding the strength to share her experience, and wish her the best in all future endeavors. I'm taking the time to listen and learn. We have already begun making the necessary changes to ensure that this is a safe environment for all moving forward. We at the network endeavor to continue to elevate Black women's voices and create opportunities to have constructive conversations to impact change." Like I said, I'm not going to be the person to come on here. I go to Joe Budden's podcast for that vulnerability, that friendship that he had with Rory and Mal, and now Ice and Ish. I go there for that type of foolery, right? It's foolery a lot of the times. My fiance really ain't a fan of the podcast because she think it's foolery a lot of the times, but I like it. So some of them jokes that he maybe initially got off, the flirting and all that, I probably would have laughed at if I listened to. But if a woman says she's uncomfortable, if a man says he's uncomfortable, you got to stop that right there. Once somebody says, "Yo, I'm not feeling this," that's got to end. Like, "Yo, I don't want to do that with you today." That's when the harassment can kind of take the precedent. Once somebody establishes, "Nah, B, I don't want to do that with you. I don't want to flirt with you. I got a boyfriend. I got a girlfriend. Can we not do that?" To me, that's when it teeters the line of, okay, this is no longer harsh jokes, uncomfortable situation. This is now full-fledged harassment. And only Olivia and Joe know the details of what happened, what was said, what was not said. And everybody in that room know what's on that podcast, which was clearly edited out, man. I'm wishing all parties involved the best, because that is much more serious than what's going on with Rory and Mal. And that's serious, obviously, relatively speaking, to the business. This right here, man, you got people that will never come back to the Joe Budden podcast after the last couple weeks of some things that came about with Joe. All right, so y'all let me know what y'all think. Comment box below. Do you believe it was wrong for Olivia to try to come at Joe Budden while he was already down, having a bad week? She essentially was like, "Yo, let me add some fuel to that fire and get it while it's hot with Joe." Y'all let me know in the comment box below. Do you agree with her approach, or it's kind of on her when she wants to come out and say what she had to say about Joe Budden, because it's her body, it's her mind. If she felt harassed, it's on her whenever she wants to come out in her time. And all right, let me know. Comment box below. I'm out. Catch full new episodes of Pharaoh's music-based platform every day only on YouTube at It's Mr. Telepharaoh. You can also find clips, updates, giveaways, and more on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, also at It's Mr. Telepharaoh. For all basketball fans, make sure you tune in to Pharaoh's daily highlights, reports, and commentary on YouTube at Hoops Pharaoh, and even more updates on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Hoops Pharaoh as well.